Why do people convert to the Eastern Rite rather than the Western Rite? I think there's two reasons for that. One reason is that the Eastern Rite is easier to find. We have in America now, I think, just over 20 perhaps, churches and missions of the Western Rite, so you're more likely to find an Eastern Rite church. The other idea is that somehow the Byzantine Rite the Eastern Rite is more authentically Orthodox, and I hope I have shown in my previous answers that this really is not true, that from the day of Pentecost onwards, there was a Western expression of the Orthodox faith, and that is what it seems many people are drawn to in the West. They are drawn to a Western expression of the Western faith, although others, having been fed up with the way that Western Christianity has gone, desire to distance themselves as much as possible from Western forms of Christianity. So I think it's got to do, first of all, as I said, with availability of the liturgy, and second of all, there's an idea perhaps that this is more authentic, related to which is the idea that the West has become totally corrupt in its religion. This is not true. This is not true. We have a kind of myth that everything Western is wrong and corrupt. There is a divide. We must make a divide between the post-Enlightenment and post-Reformation West and the West of the first millennium, which was undoubtedly Orthodox. Undoubtedly Orthodox.
Is the Western Rite just a gateway to the Eastern Rite?
This can be the case. There are some people who come to our church and then they say, oh, I think now I'm ready to move on to the Eastern Rite, really for the reasons I've said, that there's a feeling perhaps that the Eastern Rite is a more authentic expression of Orthodoxy, although, as I've said, that simply isn't true for a number of reasons. What's the question?
Is the Western Rite truly a gateway to the Eastern Rite?
So it can be a gateway to the Eastern Rite, but on the other hand, I have people who come to me from the Eastern Rite. Oftentimes it's people who have come from a Western tradition, for example, Roman Catholicism or Episcopalianism, and they miss the genius and the ethos of our Western Rite. So it's not always the case that the traffic is one way. The traffic can also be the other way. And as I have said to you before, it doesn't really matter if you're Eastern and Western. What matters is that one should be Orthodox.
Is there really a complication between switching parishes from an Eastern to a Western?
No, there shouldn't be. Certainly here in my parish, we have a very almost fluid situation. For example, I have a deacon who 2 Sundays in the month is here serving the Western Rite, and then 2 Sundays of the month he is in our local Byzantine Antiochian church serving the Eastern Rite. Sometimes I have parishioners who come to my church, other times they go to the Eastern Rite. Sometimes I have people who come to me for confession, but are nonetheless Eastern Rite people. So we shouldn't think, oh, this is the major thing, this is a major thing which divides us. No, no. The rites are different, yes, but the essential is the same, and that essence is, as I said, our Holy Orthodox faith. And above all, this faith which works by love. We must avoid an orthodoxy which is merely formulaic, which is merely an orthodoxy of praxis only, which does not involve a true conversion of heart. And I really do believe if we are truly converted to our hearts, if we are truly converted to our Lord Jesus Christ, then we will not have any difficulty of East and West. The difficulty of East and West, the antagonism between them, really comes from those who have turned our divine religion into a kind of secular ideology. No, no, that is not what our faith is. Our faith is theosis. Our faith is life with God. God who is Trinity, God who himself is diversity in unity. And that's what has always, as I have said before, always existed in the church, and which is a treasure enriching the church. People sometimes like to say, oh, we in the East have so many treasures. Yes, yes, but we in the West have our treasures too, and it is our duty, I feel our duty, and an enrichment to the entire church for those treasures to be preserved for future generations.
Why isn't there more icons specifically within the church?
Yes, so one of the important things we were told when the Western Rite was founded is that we should have more icons. And we certainly do have a doctrine of icons and a spirituality of icons in our church. The fact of the matter is, in many of our churches, we don't have room or we don't have sufficient funds to have the iconography that is found in many Eastern churches. But it's not a question of us being against icons. No, we embrace, as the West has always embraced, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Nicaea II, 787, and we venerate and reverence the icons, and we see the icons as a means of our growing closer to God, growing closer to the Mother of God, growing closer to the saints. So I don't think that's a very fair criticism to say, oh, you don't have any icons. Well, if we had more money, we'd have more icons. But be assured that our belief in the icons, our theology of the icons, and our spirituality of the icons is as firm and solid as anyone in the East. Oh, that's such a very good question. Yes. There's a book by an Italian scholar whose name I now forget, but it's called Iconophilia. And she makes this very point, that there was a great outburst of iconography during the iconoclastic period, a great outburst of iconography in Rome. So in fact, ironically enough, one of the reasons that there is a division, there came to be a division between East and West, was the heresies of the East. People are always going on about the heresies of the West. But during the patristic period, it was always the East that was producing heresies one after the other, these heresies which culminated in iconoclasm. So what you have is the emperors in Byzantium promoting iconoclasm, where you have the Pope in the West standing firm against iconoclasm and in favor of iconodulia. And that's a very, very good point, that in fact the popes of Rome were the great defenders of iconodulia, as indeed we may say in earlier times they were great defenders of the Orthodox faith every time it came under attack from heretics in the East. We should never think of ourselves as Western Orthodox. We should think of ourselves simply as Orthodox. Now, of course, we use Western rites, we look to the Western tradition, but we don't look exclusively to the Western tradition. We are blessed to be able to use both traditions, both of which are extremely rich and extremely wonderful. And this is what all of us should be doing. I think it is a great failing of modern Orthodoxy that we have forgotten the treasures which exist in the West. And we need to rediscover those treasures and to reappropriate them, and thus the whole church can be enriched. We do, however, in the West run the risk sometimes of having what, if I may be pardoned for saying, is a kind of ghetto mentality. We shut ourselves up in our churches and we think, oh, we want to preserve this particular rite. I'm very glad to say in my parish that, as I said before, we have a lot of parishioners who also go to the Eastern Rite. But I'm very, very keen that we as a parish and each of the parishioners should understand that they are part of a wider whole, and that we should all support each other by going to other parishes round about, and this we often do. Just the other day, we celebrated the feast of the Apostles Peter and Paul, and we have a church in Boulder dedicated to the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul, a Greek church, Greek, obviously Eastern Rite church, and so several of our parishioners, I myself didn't, but several of our parishioners went to that celebration. So we do need to avoid that separatist mentality. Yes, that is a schismatic mentality, but that can easily be avoided by having more inter-Orthodox, pan-Orthodox events and by participating in those.
Where can people find you or ask questions?
So, people can find me and ask questions on the internet. I am here. We have a Facebook page, we have a web page. I'm sure on from those two, you can find all the other contact details that you need. I will be very happy to answer your questions because I do believe this very much, that we have a legitimate right And we are doing something which is important for the church, which is important for souls. So if I can help you in that great endeavor, I will very happily do so. May God bless you.